forced to admit, quote, that a few messages stray from the positive and edifying contents and even seem to go so far as to contradict them, close quote. But pay no attention to those messages, even though they, quote, overshadow the beauty of the whole, close quote. The document then gets downright defensive when it adverts to, quote, small groups, close quote, who, quote, want to distort the valuable propositions of this spiritual experience, especially if the messages are read partially, close quote. Who are these unnamed small groups? Is the dicastery referring to the Yugoslavian Bishops' Conference, which proclaimed that there was nothing supernatural about Medjugorje in 1991, vindicating Bishop Zanich's position? Is the dicastery referring to Fidelity Press, publisher of this book, The Medjugorje Deception? Forget about small groups. A better question is, are we to take the dicastery's own warnings about the errors in the messages seriously or not? Why is the dicastery constantly making excuses for the gospel's theological errors? At what point does the insistence on the legitimacy of the messages break down under the dicastery's own warnings? As when it opines that, quote, this insistence on specifics becomes even more problematic when the messages refer to requests that are unlikely to be of supernatural origin, such as when Our Lady gives orders about specific dates, places, and practicalities, and which she makes decisions about ordinary matters. Although the messages of this type are infrequent in Medjugorje, we can find some of them that are explained solely from the personal desires of the alleged visionaries. The following is a clear example of these misleading messages. This August 5th, the Blessed Mother is supposed to have said, will mark the celebration of the second millennium of my birth. I ask you to prepare yourselves intensively over 3 days. Do not work on these days. By its own admission, the dicastery is forced to tell the faithful to use prudence and common sense and not to take these details seriously or to heed them. Direct quotes from the document. But then why did the dicastery then add, but this fact should not lead one to spurn the richnesses and the good of the Medjugorje proposal as a whole, when it seems appropriate to draw the exact opposite conclusion? The gospel, according to the dicastery's own admission, continues to make one theological error after another, as when she announced on July 17th, 1986, quote, I am the mediatrix between you and God, close quote. This faux pas forced the dicastery to admit, quote, that used in this way, the expression mediatrix could erroneously lead one to attribute to Mary a place that belongs uniquely and exclusively to the Son of God made man. It would, in fact, contradict what sacred scripture affirms when it says there is only one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all, which is in 1 Timothy 2:5-6. These alleged messages also fail to express adequately the fact that, as St. John Paul II explained, Mary's mediatory cooperation is, quote, subordinate to the mediation of Christ. In this way, her cooperation neither takes away from nor adds anything to the dignity and efficacious of Christ, the one mediator, according to the Lumen Gentium of the Second Vatican Council. End of quote here from the document. Rather than send the Blessed Mother to a class in Theology 101 at the Biblicum, the dicastery attributes her bad theology to, quote, maternal intercession, close quote, and then goes on to grant a nihil obstat, the Vatican's highest form of approval to Medjugorje, after thoroughly undermining its credibility. As a tacit admission of that fact, the dicastery assures us that their nihil obstat, quote, does not imply a declaration of the supernatural character of the phenomenon in question. Well, then it's not the Blessed Mother then who's talking. Well, who's talking then? We just corrected the Blessed Mother for making theological errors. Now we're saying it may not be the Blessed Mother after all. Recalling at the same time that the faithful are not obliged to believe in the apparitions they have so thoroughly debunked in their own document. The dicastery concludes by telling us, evaluating the abundant and widespread fruits, which are so beautiful and positive, does not imply that the alleged supernatural events are declared authentic. Close quote. Well, wait a minute. Why are we reading them if they're not authentic? If you can't tell us, you just corrected the Blessed Mother for saying the mediatrix, she's not mediatrix. Now you're saying it's not the Blessed Mother at all because we don't know who wrote this document, do we? The Italians would say, se non è vero, è ben trovato, which is to say, even if it's not true, it's a really good fabrication. This should be the title of this document. Now, as Clint Eastwood said to the Negro bank robber in Dirty Harry, I know what you're thinking. EMJ is selective in his obedience to church authority, but this is not the case. The church cannot speak infallibly about private revelations which involve particular historical circumstances that fall under the mandate of neither faith nor morals. In this instance, an investigative journalist has more authority than a cardinal from Rome, especially if he factors into his investigation the fact that two successive bishops of the Diocese of Mostar Duvno, who do have the duty to look into matters like this, declared, quote, the Medjugorje phenomena, close quote, was a fraud. The fact that the Yugoslav Bishops' Conference seconded their judgment is significant for someone trying to get to the bottom of this phenomenon, which is probably why the bishop's negative judgment was mentioned in the dicastery statement, although Cardinal Fernandez mentioned them in the Italian language press conference. Why then did the Vatican issue this statement? The answer I got from a member of the Parliament of Bosnia-Herzegovina who has close ties to the now retired Bishop Zanic is money laundering. Italians, he told me, without getting into specifics, set up tax-exempt foundations in Medjugorje which accept money as charitable contributions and then send the money to Bosnians who then create for-profit operations like gas stations with that money, which then gets returned to the donor after the gas station starts generating cash. After receiving this information, I asked Bishop Perich if the Vatican was involved in money laundering, mentioning the specific instance of Cardinal Giovanni Angelo Becciu, who was rumored to have sent $100,000 to Australia to pay for the railroading of Cardinal Pell, who was looking into Vatican finances at the time. Bishop Perich demurred, opining at the time that Becciu was innocent until proven guilty. But on July 3rd, 2021, Cardinal Becciu was indicted on multiple charges, including embezzlement, money laundering, fraud, extortion, and abuse of office. On December 16th, 2023, the Vatican announced that Cardinal Becciu had been found guilty and sentenced to 5 years and 6 months imprisonment, perpetual disqualification from public office, and an €8,000 fine. Cardinal Pell was pardoned after over a year in solitary confinement, but the mysterious connection between Medjugorje and the Vatican's involvement in money laundering remains as opaque as ever, because the Vatican, in spite of a mountain of evidence to the contrary, refuses to admit that anything but good fruit has come out of Medjugorje.